the Amida Sutra talking about Anathapindika. Chuyển giải cấp cô đọc. Okay. I was going to finish discussing Anathapindika sooner, but I found his life to be very interesting, so I decided to go ahead and finish the story about him in front of us. I think it's quite interesting to learn about his spiritual achievements, about his family, immediate family, and their achievements, and how he dealt with his friends, both good and bad, and the teachings that he received directly from the Buddha that we're going to talk about today. So we're almost at the end of his story, where the next chapter is about his death. So today we will talk about the discourses given by the Buddha to Anathapindika. So of the 45 rainy seasons, of the 45 years of the Buddha's teachings in India, the Buddha spent 19 in Savatthi, in Anathapindika's monastery, the monastery that Anatta built for the Buddha. And Anathapindika would visit the Buddha twice a day, but frequently he would be there to hear about the Buddha's teachings. As the most generous benefactor of the Sangha, he certainly did not want to attract attention, to create that impression that he was merely supporting the Buddha for karmic rewards, or just to get personal advice from the Buddha. So he thought that the monks and the Buddha would not regard the instructions as an obligation or a compensation for his offerings. Right? He did not expect the monks and the Buddhas to teach him in exchange for his offerings. But he thought that it was their joy, heartfelt joy, that they gave the teachings. And he would sit silently off to one side, waiting for the Buddha to teach. So whenever he came to the monastery to listen to the Buddha, if the awakened one said nothing, then Anathapindika would relate one of the episodes of his life and ask for the Buddha's opinions, advice, or teachings, and whether that he would approve his behavior or criticize his behavior, and whether that he would use that special event as a point of departure for a discourse, just to start off the conversation, to start off the teaching. In this way, he connected all that he experienced in his everyday life with the teaching. So when we, as Buddhists, when we come to a lecture, we should be prepared to contribute and ask questions to clarify for oneself, to clarify the doubts that we have, but also to ask on behalf of other people. Because Anathapindika asked the questions that today we can benefit from the Buddha's teaching. And because we have learned from it, Anathapindika's merits will also increase. So if we ask questions to clarify our own doubts, and other people can benefit from the explanation to also clear their doubt or to strengthen their faith, then we will also have merits. Right? So it works both ways, and we can also benefit from asking questions. Many of the occasions that the Buddha gave instructions to Anathapindika were recorded in the Pali Canon. So they constitute a comprehensive code of conduct or precepts, 戒giới, for the conscientious lay followers of the Buddha, and also for those in the future times like us, right? When the Buddha criticized behavior or approved behavior, it helps to give us clear understanding of what to do and what to avoid. But the Buddha says that house father, referring to Anathapindika, or lay in general, to lay practitioners, those who possess of these four things and make offerings as their duty to support the monks will have a life leading to the heaven world. So what are these four things that the lay practitioner should support the monks, the order of the monks? And these four things are the four requisites, the four basic offerings that we as lay disciples would be our duty to support the Sangha. Those include offering of a robe, y phục, alms food, thực vật,饮食, and lodging, a place to stay, and medicines, to help to treat their illness. So these are the four basic things that the Buddha taught to offer to the monks to support them, and because of those offerings that the lay practitioners will enter the heaven world after this life. So these, what are these? So these, and so that's one teaching, right? So these prerequisites of giving that the monks should expect from lay followers. The Buddha, interesting, said that this is the duty of the lay followers to support the monks. So the monks may not be working for employment to receive a salary, but the Buddha allowed the monks to expect these four things from society, or four types of offering from society. So again, those include the robes or clothes, alms food, lodging, and medicines. In the Buddha's days, the Indian society had great respect for ascetics. Ascetics or 苦行者, người tu khổ hạnh, or monks who went for alms round for food. People were more than happy to support the monks and their practice, even though they themselves were not able to do so. But in today's society, it is different. In fact, some countries in the East prohibit and even make it unlawful for people to beg for food on the streets. The reason is because those governments believe that beggars are not productive to their society economically. So there's a difference between work and employment. We should understand that clearly. Everyone should have work to be creative, but everyone does not necessarily have to be employed for a salary. So there's a distinction. Americans are workaholics compared to those in the European countries. So people who don't work or don't want to work are often looked down upon. According to one study, Americans work 37.5 hours per week, which is more than the European countries, who on the average work up to 19% fewer hours. So according to a New York Post report in 2019, half of the Americans are workaholics. They have a habit of checking emails in the middle of the night, checking emails the first thing in the morning when they wake up, and worrying about work on the day off, and prioritizing work before their personal life. So those are traits of a workaholic. Just because people are working, it does not mean that they are productive. Productivity is simply a ratio between output and input. So more input or more work, if you have low productivity, it does not mean that you have more output. We should do work that utilizes our creativity, not necessarily for the purpose of employment. This is related to the fifth factor of the Eightfold Path, Bát Chánh Đạo, Ba Trần Tao, which is right livelihood, 正命, 真mạng. Livelihood is essentially to have a meaningful and creative career that helps self and others. So monks who study the sutras teach the Dharma, while it may not be in a form of employment, but it is creative work. They have to come up with topics that are useful and applicable to the audience, and they have to learn how to communicate clearly to the audience. So they have to develop communication skills to convince the audience to lead an ethical life and to choose spiritual bliss as opposed to the worldly joy, right? So the Buddha mentioned that even though the monks do not work for employment, but it is our duty to supply the monks with these 4 requisites. In the next part of the writing here, that the Buddha advised Anathapindika of the 4 types of bliss won by the lay practitioners. The Buddha says that there are 4 types of bliss to be won by the householder: the bliss of ownership, the bliss of wealth, the bliss of deathlessness, and the bliss of blamelessness. Right? So that's the second part. Here it says, essentially, and the Buddha continues, a man has wealth acquired by energetic striving, amassed by strength of arm, won by sweat, lawful and lawfully gotten. At the thought wealth is mind acquired by energetic striving, bliss comes to him, satisfaction comes to him. This house father is called the bliss of ownership. So that's the first thing, is the bliss of ownership. Wealth that has been acquired with one's own hands in a lawful manner through one's own hard work, they can be proud of the ownership of the wealth, and they will not have regrets. People are likely to, and they will be they're likely to be careful with their spending and to not deplete their wealth through indulgence. There are the wrong kinds of wealth acquisitions. For example, there's stealing, right, to acquire wealth. This is to take what is not given. So people who steal tend to indulge and exhaust what they have quickly, because easy come, easy go, correct? People don't tend to value something that they can easily obtain. The second wrong way of acquiring wealth is coercion, of forcing people to pay, otherwise they'll be punished, for example, such as gangsters and the mafia. Right? They force people to pay a certain amount of money in exchange for protection against the danger which they create. So it's a way of forcing people to pay. Another way that is improper to gain wealth is through manipulation, such as falsifying financial records or committing securities fraud to gain wealth. This is prevalent in today's society, that people often get scammed, such as charity scams, where a thief poses as a real charity or makes up a name for a charity that sounds real in order to get money from you. There's also the debt collection scams, where debt collectors will contact you to collect on legitimate debts that you owe, or they pretend to be a debt collector to get money from you to get you to pay the debts that you either don't have or you already paid off. So in a way, it's a perfect match, because on one hand, you have people who are gullible, who are afraid when they think that there's some authority asking for money, and then on the other hand, you have those who are smart in scamming people. So it's a perfect match. So we have to be careful when we deal with people who force us to pay or ask us to act immediately. Otherwise, we face dire consequences. So we should be careful. People get tricked because they are attracted to the idea of making a lot of money for little to no efforts. people are attracted to short-term with high returns investments. For example, Bernie Madoff, right? He was the mastermind behind the $20 billion Ponzi scheme, the largest financial fraud in history. Many people have lost the money from this Ponzi scheme. According to the New York Post, he lived the remaining of his life imprisoned in shame and regret. His family members who were involved with the scam also lived in misery. So wealth earned unethically will bring misery. Wealth earned through legitimate and hard work can be blissful. So manipulation is improper way of gaining wealth because it will lead to misery. Another way of acquiring wealth improperly is through black magic or charms, using magic to fool people, to trick people. For example, many magic rites for all sorts of worldly purposes have been handed down in Indian villages from ancient times down to the present day, such as magic for gaining offspring, magic for hurting and paralyzing people, magic for pacifying enemies and evil spirits, magic for winning lawsuits, and magic for warding off misfortune, magic for curing disease, and so forth and so forth. So suppose you live in a village in India, in a miserable hut with little money, and you have no prospect of making money by ordinary means, like working hard for the next 20 years, but you have a strong desire to be rich. So there's no need to despair. You always have the option of performing magic as prospering, or more reliably, hiring some master to perform the magic for you. The only problem in this kind of get-rich-quick plan is that such magics are usually rather expensive. So if you're poor and have no money, you can't afford to hire a master to perform the magic for you. So you need money to make money. So there is, of course, something else that has more enduring interest as money for most people, even more than love, the magic of death, and that is love. Suppose, for instance, you have the misfortune of falling in love, and you find that the object of your affections does not show any interest in your advances. What do? The time-honored remedy is to resort to love magic, which, unsurprisingly, even more popular than death magic. I was reading a book, and the author described his experience in India when he was a monk there. So you perform, or you hire somebody, a master, to perform the magic for you. We call it the magic of fascination, and as a result, the person in whom you are interested is supposed to be drawn to you by some irresistible force, even though that person might not feel like so. And so when he was a monk in India, he would often get the questions about people asking him about magic, whether he was able to perform magic to fulfill their needs. But this way of acquiring wealth or acquiring your pursuit is not reliable. So there's no guarantee of happiness through these improper ways of gaining wealth or your pursuit. So first is the bliss of ownership here is through, the Buddha taught us that it's through legitimate hard work that we can be proud of, and we feel very blissful, pleasant of our ownership of the things that we have acquired. The second is that once you have gained the wealth through the proper means, you can further have bliss depending on what you do with your wealth. So in this case, the Buddha is saying, once you have acquired the wealth, that you should do meritorious deeds, 修福, 度福, right? And that helps you to continue your bliss. Some people don't know how to cultivate bliss with their wealth. They use it to indulge in fleeting material joy, which will only bring boredom and dissatisfaction and eventually suffering. Why is that? When we indulge, we are depleting our merits, 福报, 福报, through the worldly joy. When we have no more merits, we have no value. And without value, as a person, there is no self-worth. And if there is no self-worth, we will feel horrible about ourselves. On the other hand, when we use our wealth for meritorious deeds, 度福, 修福, we do not deplete our current joy, but we also continue to cultivate merits for a future bliss. For example, you volunteer, you spend the whole day helping to build a house for victims of a natural disaster. You may be very physically tired at the end of the day, but you had fun and you felt good about your service. So your good feeling came from your contributions to help others alleviate their suffering. So those contributions generate merits. So when we have merits, we have value, we have self-worth. And self-worth is the foundation of self-confidence. Within self-confidence, there's emotional positivity, and with which we will naturally feel good about ourselves, things, and events. This is why when we use wealth to do meritorious deeds, bliss will come to us, satisfaction will come to us. So performing meritorious deeds is more than just giving money. Our minds should be pure, otherwise the fruit may not be sweet. In Dhammapada, there was a story that the Buddha related. There was a story about wrong type of merit cultivation. King Pasenadi was was supposed to be visiting the Buddha, but he was late, and he explained to the Buddha that the reason that he was late was because there was a rich man in his country had died, and that all of his belongings were confiscated. And then the Buddha, he said that even though he was very rich, but he was very stingy, and he did not give anything in charity. He was even reluctant to spend money on himself, and he wore cheap clothes and would eat very basic food. And the Buddha told the king that the reason that he was rich was because he happened to make an offering to the private Buddha, Pitsufor, who came for alms round. So he told his wife to give offering to this private Buddha, and the wife was kind of surprised because he rarely gave anybody anything. But he found it surprising that her husband instructed her to give offerings to the private Buddha. So she filled up the alms bowl with some choice food, delicious food. And the rich man again met the private Buddha on his way home, and he looked at the alms bowl, and he realized that, this monk was just gonna after eating, he was just gonna sleep, and it would be no benefit to me. But had I given my servants good food, they would have provided better service to me. So in a way, he regretted that he had asked his wife to offer food to the private Buddha. So this same man had a brother, and the brother had a son. So he wanted to kill the nephew in order to inherit his brother's wealth. So because the man had offered alms food to the private Buddha, that he became rich in the present life. But because he regretted of offering foods to the private Buddha, he had no wish to spend anything on himself, meaning that he could not enjoy the wealth that came to him. He might as well have been a poor person, right? He could not enjoy the wealth that came to him. Because he had killed his own nephew, that he had to suffer in the hell for 7 existences. His bad karma having come to an end, and he was able to reborn as a human being, but because he had the thought of not making offering to the private Buddha, that he added his affinity, yin, yuan, in cultivating further merits. So that's why in his life, that even though the Buddha was around, he did not make any offerings to the Buddha to cultivate more merits, to cultivate good karma. So that's why the king remarked that he was foolish to not take advantage of the opportunity that the Buddha was still alive and was in his own town. So the Buddha at the end spoke this verse: "Wealth destroys the foolish, but it cannot destroy those who seek the other shore, nirvana or nibbana. By his craving for wealth, the fool destroys himself as he would destroy others." So a few things that we can learn from this story is that making offerings to an enlightened being, including private Buddhas, is very auspicious, 吉祥, giktung. And the result is abundant wealth. So that's the first thing in this story that we learned. The second thing is that when one gives with an impure heart, such as regret, one will not enjoy the fruit of one's giving. So in this story, the rich man had wealth, but he could not enjoy it. He did not buy nice clothes for him to enjoy. He did not use the money to make good food or to buy good foods for him to enjoy. The third thing that we learned from this story is that the mind or intention determines the overall effect. Right? The rich man had no real intention, no respect in the offering to the private Buddha. His regret in the offer was strong. Right? His regret was very strong. His negative emotion was very strong. Therefore, the resultant effect was that he lived in wealth like a poor man. His wealth later on was all confiscated by the king. So he was not able to enjoy the wealth. So this is a very good lesson for us, because when we make offering to a temple or to a monk, that we should give with respect and gratitude. Otherwise, it will be a disservice to ourselves that we will have, in the future, we may have money, we will have work, we will have a job, but the job comes as hard labor, right? We will have to endure the criticisms, the hardships, and even without support of our co-workers, because we have defiled that karma, the good karma. And so it's a mixture of good and bad. They don't cancel out, but they will have an overall effect. So whatever is stronger will have the effect. So even we give a little bit, it may not be a whole lot, but when our heart is pure and we give with gratitude and reverence, then the effect is very joyful, right? In other words, we may not have a lot of money, but because we are very joyful as if we have a lot of money. And the fourth point that we can learn from this story is that the effect of killing of his own nephew to inherit his brother's wealth was suffering in hell. So this is very easy to understand. The fifth is that by having regret in offering to the private Buddha, that he destroyed the affinity to further cultivate merits. So in other words, we have removed the opportunities, we have destroyed the opportunities for us to continue to cultivate merits. And if we don't cultivate merits further, then whatever that we have and we enjoy, it will be the end of it. And when we have no merits, we will have suffering. And this is, so the infinity here, duyên, right? Duyên cúng Phật, duyên tốt, duyên lành. Good, san yuan, right? We destroy the affinities to cultivate merits, to have bliss for ourselves, so that we can have a pleasant life, so that we can continue the journey towards spiritual liberation. And this is why King Pasenadi called him a fool, because he was so foolish to not take advantage of the opportunity to cultivate more merits. The last thing that we can learn from this story is, and the Buddha concluded, that wealth, when not handled properly, will destroy oneself or others. But when wealth is used properly for meritorious purposes towards spiritual liberation, 解脱, 解脱, it is harmless and can even bring bliss. So offering is very important. Wealth is very important. It depends on how we use it. If we use it properly, then it will bring bliss. It will bring happiness. But if we don't use it properly, then it can bring harm to us. The third thing that can bring bliss to us is to owe no debt, great or small, to anybody. Of course, this is the old way society, but in today's society, we have to differentiate that there are two types of debts, right? One is good debt, and the other one is bad debts. But debts overall, even for good debts, if we don't have the ability to handle those debts, then those debts become bad debts, because they create a lot of mental pressure and the quality of life is reduced. Good debt is, for example, where it's like a mortgage, where you can get some tax benefits from it. Bad debts would be like buying a car, a depleting asset. That's an example of bad debts. But if you have money, then it's not, some people will take out a loan, for example, and then invest what they have because they know they can get better return, or likely to get a better return. But if they are able to handle taking on a debt and have extra money for something else, then there's no need for them to pay off the debt, and where they can use that money to invest somewhere. If they, for example, are able to get a good loan with a very low interest, then it's financial decisions that everybody has to make, right? Okay, so about debtlessness, if used wisely, wealth can create a sense of financial independence. So when we don't have any debts, we are essentially financially independent, right? Nobody can control us. If you had debt, then you are under somebody's control because you have to pay according to the terms. But wealth, if not used properly, can create a trap of imprisonment. So reports had that Bernie Madoff and his family lived luxuriously from some of the $20 billion that people invested in his company. And they must have thought that they were smart, and those investors were fools to invest in the company, thinking that they will get a return. And some people do get return, but using not from the actual investment, but from the new money that people invest in his company. Little did Madoff family know that they were paving their way to suffering. So he was imprisoned and living in regret. He died a couple years ago. His oldest son committed suicide by hanging himself, and his family is living in shame. If one owes debts and doesn't want to pay back debts, there's always the fear of debt collectors coming after him, right? So a life of fear is not a life of freedom. Therefore, when one lives on the foundation of greed, one is building a prison for oneself. Imprisonment is hell and suffering, and there is no bliss or satisfaction. On the other hand, when one lives on the foundation of morality or precept, 持戒, 己giới, one becomes blissful and contented. Because as the Buddha said, wealth cannot destroy those who speak spiritual liberation, nirvana. If it cannot destroy you, then you can live a life of no fear with bliss and satisfaction. Knowing that you have done nothing wrong is a powerful and positive emotion, which is very conducive to meditative bliss. So when one practices meditation and nurtures the emotional positivity, one then begins to open the gates of spiritual freedom, right? And there are three ways to create karma, and that's what the Buddha is teaching us here. Is that now in addition, so the next part of the next factor of bliss is blamelessness. And it's blameless actions of body, blameless action of speech, and blameless actions of mind. So now body, speech, and mind are karma, are pure, then there will also be bliss. So the Buddha is saying that there are three ways of creating karma: through the body, the speech, and then mind. So similar to the last explanation, the purer the mind, our speech and bodily action, the more blissful one feels. So this feeling is based on contact between the six senses and objects. So feeling 受 or 陶 is based on contact 触 or 触, right? And between the six senses, 六根 sáu根 or 六尘 or objects, 六尘 sáu尘. When the nature of such contact is skillful, 善 or 停, then it produces joyful feeling. When we have kind thoughts, thinking about helping others, we are cultivating skillful contact. Bliss and satisfaction will come to us. When we have kind speech, maintaining harmony of those around us, we are creating skillful contact. Bliss and satisfaction will come to us. And when we go out there to volunteer to help others, we are also creating skillful contact. As such, bliss and satisfaction will come to us. So the Buddha concluded that these four kinds of bliss that we can achieve for ourselves, that we don't have to be at the mercy of anyone to give us joy and happiness. So we can follow the Buddha's guidance with the support of our spiritual friends to create happiness for ourselves and others. So if we want to have bliss for ourselves, the Buddha taught us to make offerings, right? The four basic types of offering, of clothes, of food, of lodging, and of medicine to the monks. And that if we want to have bliss, then we should make offerings, using our pure mind, a mind of reverence, mind of gratitude, and not regret. and that if we want to have bliss, there are 4 types of bliss that we can have as lay practitioners. And these are the 4, that the bliss of deathlessness, or the bliss of wealth, acquiring wealth through legitimate means, and the bliss of deathlessness, to have financial freedom is very blissful, and the bliss of blamelessness, that you have done nothing wrong. And so with these 4 types of bliss, that it's within our hands to achieve these 4 types of bliss. And there's another sutra talking about the instructions that the Buddha gave to Anathapindika. He said that there are 5 desirable, pleasant, and agreeable things which are rare in this world. And what are those 5? They are long life, beauty, happiness, fame, and heavenly rebirth. The Buddha further said that I do not teach that they are to be obtained by prayer or by vows. Now, he said that the Buddha continued, if one could obtain them by prayer or vows, who would not do it? So everybody likes things that are desirable, pleasant, and rare in the world, precious in the world. And there's no one who doesn't want long life, beauty, happiness, fame, or heavenly rebirth. Even though those who do not want to live in this world anymore, they are still pursuing the happiness of death. Right? At least they think that death will solve all of their worldly miseries. The Buddha doesn't teach people to obtain them through improper ways. Now, the author of this paper translated as vows. I can understand prayers, but vows I have a little bit trouble understanding, because vow seems to indicate something very positive. You vow something and you pursue. You put in the effort to achieve your vow. So usually you have a vow and then you have something to substantiate that vow. So I have a problem accepting this word. So I looked into the Chinese translation, and the Chinese is 希望, 希望. So this is more acceptable, because it looks like it's like a wish, prayer, which is consistent with prayer, a wish, hope to get something. But when you hope, you wish to get something, it doesn't mean you do put in the efforts to get it. You wish to have it. You pray to the Buddha for a lottery ticket. It doesn't mean that you work hard to cultivate merits. So vow doesn't seem quite correct in this context. But the Buddha seems to be saying praying or wishing for something without putting in an effort is improper, because it's not realistic. You can pray and hope and wish all you want for a full stomach, not to be hungry, but unless you go eat or drink something, your prayer, hope, and wish for a full stomach will not be realized. Right? So it's not realistic, because you can pray for food, for example, and somebody can give you food, but it doesn't mean you will be full. Right? You have to actually eat or drink in order to be full. And so that's what the Buddha is saying, that, don't be realistic about it. These things, the Buddha is not rejecting long life, beauty, happiness, fame, and heavenly rebirth, but he rejected the idea of praying for those things. So we should understand how to pray, how to obtain those things, and not just to beg for it, to pray for it, but to put in the efforts to achieve them. So this is consistent with conditionality, 缘起法, 法允可以. So the first thing that the Buddha taught was about long life, right? Everybody likes to live a long life. Of course, a healthy long life, not a long life of being a vegetable. So the Buddha is teaching that if a person wants longevity, one should follow the path here. If one wishes to have longevity, then one should follow the path that is conducive to longevity, and not just to pray for longevity. We should understand that the reason that a person does not have long life is not because that he does not pray, but his karma and lifestyle are not conducive to long life, right? The way that he lives is not long life, very conducive to long life. For example, if you want to have a healthy long life and you drink and indulge yourself every day, and you pray for the Buddha for a healthy body, then it's not going to help you, because you are doing things that are not conducive to good health. Even if you maintain your good health and you don't pray, you exercise, you eat right, then you can still have good health. So the things that we do should be consistent with what we're asking for. So therefore, praying is not a proper condition for long life. It is not mentioned in the sutra here, but there are conditions for long life. So the primary condition for long life is to protect life, right? That's logical. So if we want longevity, we should lead a life that is not harmful or destructive to others, things, and events. 人, 事物, nhân, 事, vật. So besides developing a heart of loving kindness and compassion, our living lifestyle should also be consistent with the compassionate heart, meaning that having loving kindness for ourselves, to have loving kindness for ourselves, our family and friends, strangers, foes and enemies, and all sentient beings. So loving kindness for ourselves in terms of longevity is to do no harm to our mind, speech, and the body. We don't think about things that are mentally harmful to ourselves, like anger, jealousy, right? Hatred. Those negative thoughts are very harmful to ourselves. So we should avoid harming ourselves if we have loving kindness for ourselves. And speech should not create harsh words that are destructive to ourselves, right? Those negative thoughts. You say things to influence you negatively. Lowering your self-esteem, destroying your self-confidence. We don't have to be precious about ourselves, but we should be responsible for our own body by taking care of it, because we have this body, the ownership of this body, and we should be responsible for the body. So then that means that we should eat healthy, we should exercise every day, and avoid harmful stress from greed and anger, and engage in creative work, and volunteer to help others, and elevate our self-worth. If we are mentally and physically healthy and positive, we will be able to tolerate pain without mental suffering. If our lives are not based on loving kindness, when we see people suffering, we won't be able to give rise to compassion. Right? từ bi, 慈悲. Without loving kindness, when we see people suffering, we will not be able to give rise to compassion. If we don't have loving kindness for ourselves, then it will be almost impossible to care about other people, right? So the first thing that the Buddha taught is very realistic, is to have loving kindness for ourselves. If we don't lead a life that is conducive to the development of loving kindness and compassion, then that's not consistent with longevity. And any desire for a healthy, long life will just be an empty wish. Right? So I believe This is the point that the Buddha was trying to make clear to Anathapindika. So our aspiration and lifestyle need to be consistent in order for our wish to come to fruition. So it's not just by merely praying to the Buddha, but we should live a life that is consistent with our wish. The reality is that we can try our best, and we should, to live a healthy lifestyle with compassion, but it is very difficult to maintain it in this world. We are constantly challenged by the environment with opposing forces, and our abilities are limited. So for example, we may put in our best efforts to save the environment, but there are more people trying to destroy it, right? So, and until we are enlightened, we will continue to be influenced by the environment, for better or for worse. It's probably for worse being in this world, but if we want a better influence, then it would be better to be in Sukhavati, 极乐世界, cực lạc thế giới. Because this world does not provide the facilities and opportunities for us to grow spiritually. So for example, in this world, we are constantly, the world is constantly putting pressure on us. Life gets more and more difficult. It doesn't seem to get any easier. We have to put in a lot of our own effort to keep the world's pressure off of us and to keep it at bay, just to have room for us to grow. So it feels like we never have enough time to do anything, always racing against time to complete what we want to do. So much of energy is spent in this way, fighting to have a taste of a moment of rest, but never really experience true tranquility because we are too exhausted to rest. In the Amitabha's Western Pure Land, Sukhavati, 极乐世界, cực lạc thế giới, we won't have to do that. All of our energies can be put towards spiritual growth and spiritual development. So life in this world is not very conducive to human development and spiritual development. There are three important aspects of life that consume all of our time and energy, but they are not conducive to spiritual development. So let's talk about these three aspects, and then we'll wrap up and save the rest for next time. The three aspects that consume all of our time are family, right, career, and leisure. An American family, an ideal American family consists of a couple, a son or daughter, and a pet, a television set, and a car. So besides the personal needs of each person that needs to be attended to, the relationship itself between a husband and wife, between parents and children, between family and pets, and the car, each one also needs regular maintenance, like a car, attention, and care. Right? So family life is indeed very demanding. If the demands are not met, then conflicts will arise. Husband and wife arguing, children disobeying parents, car stops working. So life is not easy. Only those who have great merits and wisdom are able to sustain a happy life without conflicts. But this is an extremely small percentage. But the majority of people will have some form of family conflicts. So next is I want to talk about is career. So family in this life is very demanding, right? And career is not so easy too. A career in this world consists of employment, working for a wage. Recently, there has been a phenomenon during the pandemic called the Great Resignation, where people quit the current job to find another one. So this suggested that people were not happy with their jobs, and maybe they wanted more pay or more opportunities to advance in their careers. There was a study last year that concluded that about 75% of those who resigned did not find much satisfaction with their new jobs. So the grass was not so green on the other side. It is so very difficult to work, to have work that does not harm others in one way or the other, one way or another. There are jobs that increase one's greed, anger, and delusion, which are harmful to one's spiritual development. So in this way, it's not very easy to have to do something to have kind of work that is completely, perfectly ethical. The last factor, we'll talk about leisure and then we'll conclude today's conversation, is leisure. So as for leisure, it is to get away from all things that we're involved with daily. The idea of worldly leisure is to pass time, to forget about family and work, and even our own faults and ourselves. When one is on a vacation, one wants to experience the most of it, running here and there, seeing this and that quickly before the vacation ends. And when one gets back from vacation, one is so exhausted mentally and physically that one needs another vacation to recover from the last vacation. So how does Sukhavati provide opportunities that are more conducive to one's spiritual growth and development? So there are three things that it provides. So according to the Amida Sutra, later on we'll find out, but we're going to skip forward a little bit to talk about the three things that Sukhavati provides to make the environment more conducive to spiritual growth and development. The first thing is that birth in the lotus flower is pure and it's free from emotional dependency and bondage. And additionally, there's the spiritual community of bodhisattvas with whom we stay together and learn side by side with them. So we're learning from somebody who are truly positive, who are truly individual in the sense of their being responsible for their own development, that they have the wisdom, they have merits to get to to help us to get to enlightenment. And then as far as career, they traverse the universe to help sentient beings. And they don't do this for a salary. Right? They are free to do so out of compassion and loving kindness. So they are not under any kind of pressure to do the work. But it's not that they go there and they don't do anything. They do meaningful work that is very conducive to enlightenment, to Buddhahood. And then the third thing is that as far as leisure goes, there's the joy of listening to the Dharma talks of Amitabha. Right? One of the best things about being in Sukhavati is that one is not subject to cycle of life and death, and one continues to advance towards enlightenment without any danger of falling back. And the lifespan of those in Sukhavati is extremely long, and the Buddha illustrated this in the Infinite Life Sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha said to Ananda that the life of Amitayas, another name for Amitabha, is so long that it's impossible for anybody to calculate. And he gave an illustration to make the point. That suppose that all the sentient beings throughout the entire universe in the 10 quarters had the ability of a Shravaka, which is Tanvang Shengwen, hearer, or a private Buddha. And they all come together and they use their power of the wisdom to calculate the length of the Buddha's lifespan, right? After 1,000 million kappas, they could not reach the limit. They could not get to the final number. So it is with the lifespan of the hearers, bodhisattvas, and heavenly beings and human beings in Sukhavati. Similarly, we cannot even calculate, it is beyond imagination to even try to express what it means. So again, the number of the hearers and bodhisattvas living there is incalculable. So not only the population is infinite, that is beyond any calculation, but the lifespan of each being in Sukhavati is infinite. So that's one of the best things that one, in terms of spiritual development, is to be in Sukhavati. So this world is not very conducive, but we should continue to try our best, because it's not that we all of a sudden be in Sukhavati and we become a different person. So we have to live a life in this world conducive to enlightenment in order to make that transition. So in other words, we should live a life in this world as if we are already in Sukhavati. Right? So we have to train our mind so that we can make that transition easily. So when I say this world is not very conducive to enlightenment, it doesn't mean that we don't value it. But we should take care of it. We should be responsible for our body, right? Those around us and the environment, because we are, until we reach enlightenment, we continue to be impacted. And if we don't do anything now to make that transition is not going to happen. So the transition starts now, and therefore we should value what we have, even though the world is putting a lot of pressure on us, but we can shield ourselves by cultivating merits, right? The 4 givings that the Buddha mentioned about, and the bliss of wealth ownership, right? Through proper acquisitions and using wealth to conduct meritorious deeds, right? And have loving kindness to cultivate our hearts so that it is more consistent with the spiritual life, right? So we're not ignoring everything that we have in front of us, but we should transform ourselves in order to transform the environment, in order to be consistent with Sukhavati by living a more a spiritual life that is conducive to enlightenment. Okay? So we will end here. Next time when we pick up, we'll talk about the 4 additional things that the Buddha taught Anathapindika how to achieve beauty, happiness, fame, and heavenly rebirth. So we just finished about the bliss. The first thing was longevity, long life. So next time when we meet, we will talk about the remaining 4: beauty, happiness, fame, and heavenly rebirth.